excellence and ensuring that there are human resources that are being produced that can deal with the challenge at hand. In terms of international cooperation, I think certainly institutions such as mine, UNDP, and other UN agencies who work on this particular topic can help with co-creating solutions. So we heard about, in the case of Jamaica, one opportunity is how do we take a best practice from one island and to upscale that across several islands. But how can we also design projects at scale for the financing? So in the case of, I think it was one of our colleagues, it might have been you, or one of the other colleagues talked about smaller projects. How can we aggregate smaller projects into larger bankable projects is an area where I think the international cooperation can really certainly facilitate and advance in that area. Research and development, also knowledge and best practices, not just from within the region, but from across other parts of the region that can be brought to bear in supporting this particular ambition. I'll stop there. There's quite a bit more, but I think we can touch on that as we go through the Q&A.
Okay, thanks so much, Ronald. So we've now heard from each of our panelists, and we still have some time. No one's actually told me when the session has to end. So until they do, we will carry on. So I'm now going to open up for questions from the floor. So please feel free to make any intervention you want to make, but please, I would suggest you direct your question to whichever one of the panelists you'd like to direct your question to. So whoever would like to speak, please raise your hand. If you could explain your organizational affiliation, which country you're from, and who you would like to direct your comment to, we'll carry on from there. Thanks so much. I've just been told we can end the session after 2 questions. So we have 2 questions and 7 panelists. So that means 2 of you are going to be lucky and 5 unlucky. Or the other way around, depending on what the question is. So I can see Michael Ernst, please.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you to all the organizers. My name is Michael Ernst, and I'm with the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. And my question's a little odd. It's not coming from the humanitarian background, but certainly more relevant to the infrastructure issues presented here. And actually, Andrew, you touched on it a bit, and so did many, I think some of the other, I think Mr. Baldeo maybe commented as well. The issue of maintenance and finance, that's what I'm running into a lot, struggling with that there's excitement, there's willingness to follow standards occasionally in some instances, but maintenance, especially if there hasn't been an event, that falls off all the time until the event occurs. So anyway, any response to that would be appreciated.
So I think that's a kind of a generic question on the importance of operations and maintenance, and maybe if Michael would just allow me to add to the question. I mean, we need to take into account that, I mean, if we look at the total cost of infrastructure over the entire life cycle, often only 30% or so is actually in the capital expenditure. The rest is in the operations expenditure, which includes maintenance. And one of the key causes of premature obsolescence is lack of investment in maintenance. Often when particularly countries go into a fiscal crisis, one of the first things that gets cut is maintenance. So let me, I think, open up to whoever would like to start answering the question, and if several of you would like to touch on this would be great.
I think yes, it's a very right question, and maintenance is a big issue in infrastructure. And we have seen that generally in the past, infrastructure was always thought in terms of creating the asset. Now it's working. Yeah. So in the past, generally the infrastructure was mainly thought in terms of creating the asset, that you create an asset and then subsequently we'll see of maintenance. There was no maintenance budget, there was no provision in the concession document itself, so it was all left to the concession authority or to the concessionaire itself that he will do the maintenance part as per his suite bill. But what we have started doing in India, especially in the road sector, I can give you one example, that road sector projects which were being taken in PPP mode, there we have already decided a maintenance budget which is mandatory part. So you cannot deviate from that. You can go above that, but you cannot go below that. So that maintenance part budget is part of the concession agreement itself for the PPP project. Even from the EPC project, which is the project which is financed by the government, there also now the project is taken in the life cycle approach. So there is a DPR, there is a construction of asset, and then there is a maintenance part for which provisions have been made. And Ministry of MORTH has started with various initiatives which take care of the maintenance part after construction of the asset. And they have come up with live vans and mobile vans which travel on the road and try to find out the level of maintenance, the status of maintenance, if there is any problem, and they report back, and accordingly action is being taken. So I have given this example only for one sector, but in many other sectors, we slowly and gradually are becoming more aware about the requirement of maintenance and the impact of maintenance on the resilience of the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else would like to make any comments on the maintenance issue from amongst the panelists? Ronald, you're looking puzzled or perplexed?
Puzzled. I was just thinking back to my youth, and I'm wondering, back in my youth, I mean, the whole issue of maintenance of infrastructure was built into the Public Works Department, part of the local governance mechanisms. And with increasing potentially what would be the tax base, we've seen a disappearance of that type of financing. I mean, there are perhaps many answers why, but I think we're coming full circle if we want to look at sustainably financing and maintaining local infrastructure, given their importance to trade and economic development. How well we're linking that back to the tax systems, the taxation systems, and also the reform of the tax sector. So that's something that was in my mind. But since you prompted me to share it, agreeing that it is an issue and wondering if we're going back to basics or should go back to basics when looking at the financing systems to ensure that we can sustainably deliver on sustainably financing the maintenance element.
Thank you so much, Ronald. If I'm not mistaken, I saw Rita putting her hand up. So Rita, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I had a basic question. I think it's first to Andrew and maybe rest of the panelists as well, Ms. Sahu as well, who spoke about a little bit about the climate-related innovative work that you're doing on the ground. I'm more interested in knowing when policy decisions on infrastructure, large public infrastructure and investment in infrastructure is taken, how are the gender dimensions of that taken into account? How is women's needs and access to such infrastructure, their role in maintenance, their role in the governance of infrastructure, if at all, is accounted for in all this research and all the economic work that is going into it? Thank you.
So I'd like to, which of the panelists would like to take that question? Please go ahead.
So, well, gender aspect, I can give you one or two examples. For Housing for All project, which is a huge project of Government of India, which takes care of providing housing to everyone. Now, the ownership of those houses are either in the name of the women of the family or jointly in that, and that is creating a lot of change as far as gender dimension for infrastructure is concerned. Secondly, there are multiple other examples for, as I talked about Jal Jeevan Mission. There, the water mitras are all women SHGs. They are the local women communities engaged. They are taking care of not only provision of water, but also ensuring that the sources are rejuvenated, water sources are not getting depleted. And therefore, because in India and I think many other countries, especially in the rural area, the burden of fetching water is on the women folk. So these are one or two examples. There are multiple examples across every infrastructure sector which showcase that how we are tackling the question of gender divide or gender issues through providing of better infrastructure, facilities and services. Thank you.
So Priya, would you like to come in on
Yes,
this one as well?
so when it comes to Tamil Nadu, I think it is a well-known fact that the government has invested heavily in women's education as well as in women's empowerment. And one of the greatest moments that we see in Tamil Nadu is the self-help group movement, which has led to the formation of these microcredit groups at the village level. And in my personal experience also, I've been able to see that all these projects that we are talking about, it was also mentioned about the Jal Jeevan mission or other missions of the government of India or the government of Tamil Nadu, they are in the forefront. So just to give you an example, we have, I mentioned about the climate smart villages, and there it is our policy to make sure that women are engaged in most of the works that are taken up at the village, whether it is operating these, the small cadastral level data collection center, or it is the livelihood schemes that the kind of, which is happening at the village level. Also, it is to be noted that even at the policy level, I spoke about the climate studio, even at the policy level, we are ensuring consciously that decisions are taken, that women have to be involved in much bigger way. So in our the climate studio, we have 20 young scientists, and most of them are young women.
Thank you so much, Priya. I'm going to allow one more question from Santosh, very good friend Santosh. So please go ahead, and then we're going to shut the session because I've been told we're running out of time.
Thank you. Just a clarification, because Andrew shown that there is a huge resilience funding gap. There is a challenge, and that other tools are coming up for the risk assessment of the infrastructure. So that, and there is also capacity gap. So two things, how that can be taken together for reaching to the objective. Some resilient policy is also coming up. The tools for risk assessment of the infrastructure is coming up, and still side by side that resilience gap, that funding gap is there. So how these three can combine together for reaching out to the objective?
Would anyone like to take that question on? Ron is smiling, but it's always dangerous. But maybe, Tanek, would you like to look? I think that really talks to some of the things you were talking about in your presentation.
In Jamaica, in relation to merging the capacity building, the resilience risk assessment tool, all of them are being done within phases. So the training of individuals from various sectors and agencies across ministries are being trained in this specific tool. And in relation to the next stage of the project is financing, trying to create buildable, bankable projects for the future. So they're not just thinking about it like, let's just identify. They're thinking about all the different steps because all of them are necessary in order for us to build resilience and for it to be done in a way that it can be maintained and that we're not losing, in terms of, persons not having the capacity. So we're not losing manpower or human resources. So they're thinking about it in all aspects. So to make sure that the projects that are coming out of this tool or that are bankable, that the private sector are involved, that the public sector is also involved, and that they're engaged. And in relation to gender, Jamaica is also very engaged with having a gender and climate change strategy and action plan, which makes sure that we engage all our focal points across all ministries, and that we make sure that each engagement consultations are also equitable. So everyone is invited to be a part, to have a seat at the table, and to be involved. So all of those things are important.
Thanks so much, Tanek. Let me just ask a couple of the panelists who haven't actually responded to anything yet if I'd like to say anything else. So Raditya, would you like to make any final remarks from your side or respond to any of the questions that have come up?
So maybe again from Indonesia, we would like to have this critical infrastructure or sustainable resilience as one of the commitment we have, not only in the policy at the national level, but we would like to have this resilience as a local issue. That's why we want to have the people having the infrastructure very equitable and can be delivered for all in the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophie, are you still with us? Would you like to make any final remarks?
Yes, I'm still with you. Well, I think what we discussed today is really out finally to support the infrastructure practitioners to better identify the risk at first and how to provide the incentive. I think there is a huge sensitivity, and it's something we saw in each presentation today, and a lot of measures that are taken or plans. What we see at the OECD is that, generally speaking, countries are very good when it comes to planning adaptation, and I think they identified quite very well the challenges. The challenge in the end is really in terms of implementation, and this is where I guess capacity building indeed either to use climate data, to apply for funding, to even receive labels for the infrastructure will be a true prerequisite before strengthening the resilience of infrastructure. But I guess that's more or less summarized what we all said today.
Thanks so much, Sophie. And Stephen, would you like to have the last word?
I don't know about the last word, but just going to the thought on the assessment. I think this is where, you know, the role of government setting strategy is really important. And, you know, as the Tonga example highlights, it's about making sure that climate and disaster risk information is available to all parties so that the private sector and others can also use it. And I think something we haven't discussed, but disclosure is another area which I think probably deserves some more attention. Understanding the risk, pricing the risk, you know, realizing that it needs to be shared across both public and private aspects. So, yeah.
Ron, did you want to say? I can see you itching to say something else.
Yeah. I think, Andrew, on the issue around the financing gap, I think one of the things we have to consider is, you know, one, the financing environment is quite fragmented, and I don't think we're extracting the maximum from the environment because of that, the financing environment. And so I think we now need to have an integrated risk lens brought to bear. So earlier we heard this question of including geophysical hazards into the communique alongside climate hazards. So if we take an integrated risk lens where we're focusing on vulnerability, exposure, and capacity within the infrastructure sector, because that's what we're really trying to target. We're trying to reduce vulnerability and exposure and build up capacity in the system to be able to deal with that. And that will require, you know, harmonizing financing sources across, you know, these different fora of development finance, climate finance, and disasters finance, so we can extract maximum core benefits going forward. So I wanted to add that point to the question our colleagues asked about the financing gap.
Thanks so much, Ronald. So with that, we're bringing the session to a close. I'd just like to mention, I think CDRI has circulated to everyone here a white paper called Pathways to Infrastructure Resilience, which I think succinctly summarizes a lot of the points we've been discussing today. I'd like to really thank each one of our panelists who have been here, plus Sophie, who's joined us from Paris, for your contributions. And I'd like to thank all of you for your patience and good listening skills for joining us in the room for the last hour and a half. So thanks to everyone. And I think I'd like to ask all the participants to join us at the front for a group photo maybe. Yeah.